This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and GatheringMagic.com, your place to explore the game.
Hi, my name is Chris, and this is my unconventional Child of Alara deck. Alright, so here we are on to the deck tech. I have 3 basic lands of each type. As you can see, I used Ravnica lands, so they make a whole lot of sense when you see what kind of creature type I'm running in this deck. So 3 forests, 3 islands, 3 mountains, 3 plains, and then 3 swamps. Now, I also wanted to use lands that you don't typically see in Commander, because I thought it'd be kind of a fun way to have this deck operate. And yeah, like I said, you don't typically see these. I'm going to get a little closer here. Alright, so I use the Onslaught, or not Onslaught, sorry, the Odyssey lands that you can sack for any color mana. So we have an Abandoned Outpost, Bog Wreckage, Ravaged Highlands, Seafloor Debris, and Timberland Ruins. And these are fun because they come into play tapped. They'll produce a mana of a color, or you could sack them. I also use the Fallen Empire lands, which you don't see really in any decks. So we have Dwarven Ruins, where they come into play tapped. You can tap for a color of that type, and then you can tap and sack to get 2 of that type. So Dwarven Ruins, Ebon Stronghold, Havenwood Battleground, Svyelunite Temple, and Ruins of Torkir. And again, it will come into play later as to why I use these lands. I also like to use the storage lands from Fallen Empires. So we have a Bottomless Pit, Dwarven Hold, Hollow Trees, Icatian Store, and Sand Silos. And I like these because they come into play tapped, and you may choose not to untap them, and they'll gain storage counters. And then you can tap, or you can untap it when you want to, and remove any number of storage counters to get a certain amount of colored mana. And they're kind of fun to mess around with. So I also run a few utility lands. We have a Ghost Quarter, for obvious reasons, because sometimes you just need to get rid of those pesky like Cabal Coffers and Academy Ruins and stuff in other decks. So this is a useful card. I have a High Market so that I can either gain some life. I have a few sack things that come into play for combo wise in this deck, and it's just nice to have an outlet sometimes. But there's also kind of a theme as to why I chose this, and you'll see when we get to the creatures, like I said. So we have a High Market, a Thawing Glaciers, because I really like this card, and I like being able to search for basic lands off of another land. It's a little slow, but as you will see, this deck is meant to be a little bit on the slow side, and you're playing a more defensive game when you are using it. I have a Tower of the Magistrate, and I like this card because of the fact that it can give any creature protection from artifacts. So if you're coming across a Voltron deck, guess what? Those swords don't really matter, and you can do a lot of interesting things with this card. So Tower of the Magistrate. I use a Transguild Promenade, again, because I use the Ravnica basic lands. I wanted to use something that had like the city type of feel, and so yeah, we use Transguild Promenade for mana of any color. I have an Amulet of Vigor because, as you could see, a lot of our lands come into play tapped, so if this is ever in the opening hand, this is a win for us. But it's just a great all-around card, obviously. So I have an Ashnod's Altar, because sometimes, you know, like if you generate a lot of tokens, or, you know, you just need some extra mana, there you go, you got 2 in the bank. It's kind of like my replacement for Soul Ring, because I didn't really feel like it was necessary in this deck, but I like having it. I also put an Astral Cornucopia in here, and Astral Cornucopia enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. And you can tap to choose a color and add a mana of that color to your mana pool for each charge counter on the Cornucopia, which there's a lot of interesting kind of combo stuff in this deck, which on the surface you wouldn't see right away. And I think this is a great card in use with some of those combos. Crucible of Worlds, because as you can see, we're sometimes sacking lands just to get mana of colors or extra mana. So this is a fun card to be able to play those mana or those lands from our graveyard, so that we can reuse that. I have an Illusionist Bracers, and that is whenever an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, you can copy that ability and choose new targets. This is great for a combo for potential infinite mana. And as you can see, we'll get back to that, or we'll get to that one when we hit the creatures. We have Isochron Scepter, which is a pet favorite of mine, one of my favorite imprint cards, and it does, when it comes into play, you remove an instant with the converted mana cost of 2 or less from your hand from the game. And then for 2 mana, you can play a copy of that imprinted instant without paying its mana cost. And this is a super fun card with some of the instants that we will get to later on. I have an Elixir of Immortality, again, just in case we're sacking a lot of lands for mana, and even if we, get our Crucible of Worlds destroyed, because sometimes people don't like you having that out, but it's a good way to reshuffle our library. And like I said, this deck typically doesn't come across a lot of graveyard hate, but this is a good card. I have a Pariah Shield, because as I said before, this is a defensive deck, and we'll get to the type of creatures that I like to equip this with as we're going, but the card does all damage that would be dealt to you is dealt to equip creature instead, and the equip cost is pretty low. The initial cost of 5 is a little iffy, but I like this card. This is a great one. We have a Planar Portal, probably one of the slowest search cards, but again, another one of my pet favorites. So for 6 mana, you can tap to search your library for a card and put it into your hand and then shuffle your library. I tend not to run a ton of tutors in my commander deck, and if I do, I like to run slow tutors because it's a little more balanced, in my opinion, when you do things like that. So I like to run this. It's a reusable source, and it costs enough if you're searching for a single card out of your deck. Alright, now on to the creatures. This is a tribal deck, and our tribe is walls, which is really kind of an interesting thing to come across. So, first wall here is our Carrion Wall, and it's a 3/2 with Regenerate for 1 and a black, and obviously walls can't attack, but we'll get to that. And as I said, this is really more of a defensive type of deck, so people don't tend to draw a lot of hate towards you in the early game. We have a Cemetery Gate here. It's a 0/5 for 2 and a black, and it has protection from black. This is one of my favorite arts of the card. So yeah, I just thought it was cool that it's a black card with pro black. Wall of Souls. It's a 1 and a black for 1 and a black for a 0/4, and when it is dealt combat damage, it deals an equal amount of damage to target opponent. So this is kind of an interesting thing if you can get it to stick around and not die, and then you can deal a little bit of damage since your walls aren't attacking. This is a nice card. Another utility creature here, a Wall of Distortion for 2 and 2 black. It's a 1/3. And for 2 and a black, you can tap it and target player discards a card, and you can play this on your turn only, but still, it's really kind of a nice way to limit your opponent's options as you're going. Now, the only non-wall guy that we have in the deck is Aphetto Alchemist. He is a 1/2 for 1 and a blue. And you can tap him to untap target artifact or creature. And he also has a morph cost. I don't typically cast him for morph, but he is my favorite target for equipping the Illusionist Bracers too, because then you're copying the untap ability for him, and one of those untap abilities is always going to be targeted back at him so that you can keep using it. We run a Fog Bank, a 0/2 for 1 and a blue with flying, and it does not receive combat damage. And I like this one because it's got dinosaurs on it. So I run a Psychic Membrane for 2 and a blue. It's a 0/3, and whenever it blocks, you draw a card. So this is kind of a nice little draw engine in the form of a wall. As long as you can kind of keep it around on the board, it's a nice option for you. I have an Archer's Parapet for 1 and a green. It's a 0/5, and for 1 and a black, you can make each opponent lose a life. So again, another way to deal a little bit of damage to your opponents without it being too detrimental for your own well-being. I run a Carnivorous Plant. It's a 4/5 for 3 and a green, and it's basically just a heavy blocker. That's what I like to run this guy as. We have Mindbender Spores, which is 2 and a green for a 0/1 with flying, which you don't typically see on a green creature, but when it blocks any creature, you put 4 fungus counters on that creature. During its controller's untap step, they remove a counter, and as long as they have a fungus counter, they don't untap, which is kind of a nice way to slow a few people down. If you can buff this guy, this is a really great thing to have on your end of the board. Now, here we go. This is another target that I like to use for my Alchemist. He's usually the first target, and the Alchemist being the second. But for 1 and a green, you have a 0/4 that you can tap to add green to your mana pool for each creature with Defender you control. And as you can see, we're running a wall deck, so they all have Defender pretty much, except for the Alchemist. So I like to pair this when I'm about to cast the Astral Cornucopia, because then I have a good amount of mana, and I can pretty much cast anything out of my deck afterwards. Then we have an Aether Membrane for 1 and 2 red. You get a 0/5, and it can block as though it has flying, so basically reach. And it can block, or when it blocks a creature, you return it to its owner's hand at end of combat. And this is a nice little trick, especially if they don't know walls too well, because then you can remove pretty heavy threats off the board. Even if you lose this wall, it's still a nice blocker. AEtherflame Wall. For if you ever come across anybody with Shadow, I just like being able to have that option. So for 1 and a red, you get a 0/4 that can block creatures with Shadow, and it has fire breathing, which is kind of a nice little surprise trick if you're needing to eliminate a creature. We have Wall of Razors for 1 and a red. It's a 4/1 with first strike. Again, not something you typically see on a wall, so I like being able to surprise people with that ability. We have Crude Rampart for 3 and a white. It's a 4/5 with morph. Sometimes I play it for morph, just if I'm trying to get a little attack damage in, but typically it doesn't matter with this deck. Again, people see you playing walls, they're not really going to jump on you too bad. So yeah, I like to do this one because it's like a partner to the Carnivorous Plant because they're the same power and toughness. Run a Sun's Web for 3 and a white. It's flying, it's a 5/6, and cannot block creatures with power 2 or less, which is nice, again, for blocking dragons, obviously, as shown in this picture, but it's just a nice heavy card, defensively and offensively. We have Wall of Essence for 1 and a white, and for you get a 0/4. For each 1 combat damage that is dealt to Wall of Essence, you gain a life. Lifelink, obviously. Just the old wording for it, but I like this card. Now, here is one of my favorite targets for the enchant creatures that I have in this deck. It's a Wall of Glare, and you can, for 1 and a white, you get a 0/5 that can block any number of creatures each combat. So, when we get to the creature enchantments, you'll see why this is such a valuable target. And we have Wall of Nets for 1 and 2 white. You get a 0/7. At the end of combat, you remove from the game all creatures blocked by Wall of Nets. And if it leaves play, you return those cards to their owner's control that were removed by Wall of Nets. But again, 0/7, nice blocker. You can remove some threats in combat. And you can kind of play it in a political sense as well. So this is a good card. We have Wall of Resistance for 1 and a white. Again, a wall with flying is always nice. At the end of any turn that it is dealt damage, you put a 0 or +0/+1 counter on it. So it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. This is also a secondary target for a lot of the enchant creatures in this deck. We have Wall of Reverence. Again, this is why I run some of the walls that have higher base power. So it's Defender and Flying for 3 and a white, and you get a 1/6. At the end of your turn, you may gain life equal to the power of target creature you control. So again, if you're gaining like 4 or 5, sometimes even higher life total, just off of this card and another wall, it's a nice way to keep you in the game. We run a Wall of Swords for 3 and a white. You get a 3/5 with flying. Again, pretty vanilla by a lot of the other standards of the walls in this deck, but I like having it around. It's a nice flyer. And we have Wall of Denial, 0/8 with Defender, Flying, and Shroud for 1, a white, and a blue. A Living Wall, just because I really like this picture. And it's a 0/6 for 4, which counts as a wall, and for 1 you can regenerate it. So it sticks around pretty often. It's pretty easy to regenerate. We have a Mobile Fort for 4, and it's a 0/6 that counts as a wall, and for 3 you can have a gain +3 and -1 until end of turn, and it can attack. So again, it's a nice option if you just want to try to get some damage out, or if you're playing a person that's even slower than you. But really that doesn't ever happen with me. I just like to have it out. Now we have a Shifting Wall next. So for X, it counts as a wall, and it comes into play with X 1/1 counters on it. Again, once you get a Cornucopia going with a lot of mana, it can be a monster. And again, another good way to gain a lot of life with the Wall of Reverence. We have Wall of Shields for 3. You get a 1/4 with banding. And I know a lot of people are like, banding, what a lame mechanic. But honestly, it's one of the best mechanics if you're playing a defensive deck, especially walls. We have Wall of Spears. Again, another wall that has first strike. So you have Wall of Spears for 3, and that's a 2/3 with first strike, which is always a good thing. Now we get to the main combo piece of this deck. You're playing a defensive strategy and you need a way to win. So it might be a little jank, but I have a 3-card combo here. We have Enduring Renewal, Goblin Bombardment, and a Shield Sphere. So we'll start with the creature. Shield Sphere is a 0/6 for 0, which counts as a wall, and if it is assigned as a blocker, you put a -0, -1 counter on it. Then you have Goblin Bombardment for 1 and a red. You can sack a creature to have it deal 1 damage to target creature or player. And then you have Enduring Renewal for 2 and 2 white. You play with your hand revealed. If you will draw a card, you reveal the top card of your library instead. If it's a creature, you put it into your graveyard, otherwise you draw a card. And if there's a creature put in your graveyard from play, you return it to your hand. So the basic goal is to have both of these out, and then drop a Shield Sphere, and then you can just keep sacking it to Goblin Bombardment and dealing infinite damage to creatures and players. So this is your main way to win in this deck. Although there are other ways to do so, it's still the most reliable way to do it. Now, since that'll kind of transition us into our enchantments. Again, I have pointed out that I have some creatures that have flying in this deck, but that's one of the main problems facing the deck is flying. So I decided to put Levitation in here for 2 and 2 blue. It gives all your guys flying, and I really like having this card available to me. I play Asceticism again, for being able to regenerate is really nice. You can regenerate any creature, so you can also use this as a political piece if you're playing in a big group game. But it also gives all your guys hexproof, which is really, really nice. And yeah, it's just a great card for you and for beneficial opportunities with your opponents. I decided to put in the new Assault formation from Dragons. So each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Obviously, you're playing walls, you have more toughness than you do power. So for a green, a creature with Defender can attack as though it didn't have Defender. Or for 2 and a green, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Again, when you got a lot of mana sitting around, it's a good way to dump it. I have Spider Silk armor for 2 and a green. It gives all sorry about that. It gives all your guys reach and a bump in the toughness, which is really nice. Again, if you haven't seen a levitation, and this is kind of a slightly cheaper version of it, but you know, it gives you a little bit of protection against those flyers. This is a card that may or may not be on the chopping block. I haven't really decided quite yet. It's Heart of Bogarden, and for 2 and 2 red, it has a cumulative upkeep of 2. And if it is not paid, Heart of Bogarden deals 2 damage equal to its last paid upkeep to target player and each creature he or she controls. This is an interesting kind of one-sided board wipe, but at the same time too, unless you have something that's generating you a lot of mana, it can be a little tough to keep up with. So don't ever play this card until you have either one of your infinite mana combos or an Astral Cornucopia that's got a lot of mana dumped into it. So this may stay, this may not, but it's kind of an interesting card that you don't see very often. I run a castle because obviously this deck is very heavily themed towards walls and wall type things. So untapped creatures you control get +0/+2 when not attacking, and that's what your walls are going to be doing. So it's nice to have that buff for 3 and a white. I also run a fortified area for 1 and 2 white. All walls you control gain banding and get +1/+0. So you get a little bump in the damage department if you don't have the assault formation out. And even still, you might not even need that. But being able to use the banding to distribute the damage how you see fit instead of your opponents is really, really awesome in this deck. I run a Greater Oromancy. So this protects my enchantments, and then by definition protects my creatures if I have the asceticism out, because then with this out, you're not going to be able to target the asceticism, at least without going through this. So other enchantments you control have Shroud, and enchanted creatures you control have Shroud. And like I said, there are a few enchanted creatures in here that are really beneficial to a lot of the creatures in this deck, and this is another way to help them out. And of course, I run the obligatory Rolling Stones for 1 and a white. It makes it so that all your walls can attack, and sometimes that's just the funnier way to end a game if you're in a position for winning. So yeah, I definitely run this card. I run Privileged Position for 2 and 3 hybrid of green and a white. It makes other permanents I control have hexproof. So again, it's kind of like a 3-pronged protection way to protect my enchantments, my creatures, all that fun stuff. So I try to cover my bases with all 3 of those cards. Now, here are some of the enchant creatures. I run a Sadistic Glee for a black. You get, when any creature is put into graveyard from play, you put a 1/1 counter on the enchanted creature. This can get out of hand really fast, especially if you're able to protect your guys from a board wipe with, say, a regenerate or something along those lines. Yeah, it can get pretty nasty, and as you'll see, I have a few other good enchant creatures in this deck that will make this even more beneficial. I run a Diplomatic Immunity because I like the fact that the creature gains Shroud and Diplomatic Immunity has Shroud for 1 and a blue. It's really cheap, really effective. It's a nice way to cover your behind in some situations. I run an Entangler for 2 and 2 white, and it basically turns another one of my walls into a wall of glare. So yeah, just being able to block as many creatures as you can is really kind of one of the core strategies of this deck. Of course, I run an Indestructibility for 3 and a white, so Enchanted Permanent is indestructible. So again, if you pair it with a lot of those enchantments on some of those walls that are harder to deal with or give you really cool abilities, you know, you're pretty much set, and you're able to cover yourself with Hexproof or Shroud. It's great. I run an Enlightened Tutor because I like to be able to sometimes search up any of my artifacts that I need or any of those enchant creatures that we just went through. This is a really, really good card, even in Commander. Some people don't like putting the card on top of your deck, but to me, it doesn't really hinder my strategy too much because it's a slower deck anyway. Now, I run the cycle of the glyphs from the Legends set, and these all specifically interact with walls, and they're all instants, and I thought it'd be a super fun thing to do. So we have Glyph of Doom for a black. All creatures blocked by target wall are destroyed at end of combat. Again, these instants are usually a target of the Isochron Scepter, so a repeatable effect like this can be devastating to somebody. So we have Glyph of Doom for the black one. Blue is Glyph of Delusion for a blue. You put X counters on one target creature that target wall blocked this turn, and X is the power of the blocked creature. Creature does not untap as normal while it has counters on it, and you remove 1 at the beginning of each upkeep. So this is kind of a cool way to slow down some of the bigger guys. This is Glyph of Reincarnation, which is probably super difficult to read, but for a green, you can play after combat, and all surviving creatures blocked by target wall this turn are buried. For each creature buried in this manner, you choose one creature from attacker's graveyard and return it to play under the attacker's control. Treat this creature as if it were just summoned, and if there aren't enough creatures in that attacker's graveyard, all creatures in that graveyard are returned to play. But usually, you know, you're going to wipe out some really nasty threats, and then you just give them back one of their little dinky guys that maybe died prior in the game, so that you're handling their threats and giving them something that isn't as threatening back. So, and then we have Glyph of Destruction for red. Target wall you control gains +10/+0 when blocking, and any creature dealt or any damage dealt to target wall is reduced to 0, and the wall is destroyed at end of turn, which, again, it doesn't really matter too much if I lose a wall here or there, but it's just funny to be able to play that and have your wall gain 10 power and possibly wipe out an early game threat. Then we have Glyph of Life for a white. Damage on the target wall by attacking creatures is added to your life point total. So it's basically you're given a wall lifelink for a turn. So kind of an interesting interaction with the tribal theme of this deck. Now, as I said, I do run the slow tutors when I play this deck because it's I feel more fair. So I really only have the two. I have Planar Portal and the Diabolic Tutor because I think it's a nice way to balance out the game, especially since I have a few infinite combos in here. I also run a Fabricate if I'm trying to find a certain artifact or a certain wall, like a shield sphere or something like that. This is a great way to find it, especially since it puts it into your hand. I will never use the Enlightened Tutor to try to find a shield sphere. This would be my way to do it. I have Open the Vaults because, again, returning all artifacts and enchantments from all graveyards to the battlefield is kind of nice after like some sort of massive Planar Cleansing or something like that, this is a good way to get your stuff back that will set you up for turning the game around in your favor, hopefully. And then, last but not least, for 3 and 2 black, we have Patriarch's Bidding. This is a staple for any tribal deck that I ever build, because you choose a creature type, and each player returns all creatures of that chosen type from his or her graveyard to play. So it helps out your opponents, it helps out you, especially if you're trying to be political about how it's all going in this game. But this is a basic tribal card in my opinion. So there you go, that's the deck. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching CMDR Decks. Please subscribe and favorite.